Okay, next one's Viking Funerals. Because obviously I've seen on a bunch of TV shows where they never bury them on TV shows. They always put them on a little boat and send them off to sea and fire an arrow at it. Is,
You're right.
is that real? Does that ever happen?
So
I know.
it's really, really difficult to tell whether or not there's been exactly that. So the idea of pushing a boat out to sea and then setting it on fire comes from Snorri's Edda, where we have the story of Baldur's death, where Baldur is put on a boat and then, well, they don't shoot arrows at it, but they set it on fire and then push it out. So that's sort of like the origin of the idea of that boat burial at sea. Now the problem archaeologically with that is that it can be very difficult to find the remnants of a burnt boat like that was necessarily a burial, right? We can, imagine that, this is a very successful burning of the boats. Then what you will have is a little bit of the hull, charred remains of the hull left that will sink to the bottom. First of all, you have to locate that, right? That can be difficult enough in and of itself. If you actually do, and we have some examples of that, for instance, the harbor of Hedeby in what is now northern Germany, used to be southern Denmark. There's a burnt boat that has been found in the harbor. Now, the main theory on it, and I haven't investigated exactly the find and all that stuff, but the main theory on it is that was used as a fire ship that was essentially just basically sent towards the harbor to fuck shit up in war, right? I don't know if that could have been, a fire burial, but I assume that the archaeologists that have interpreted as a fire ship in war probably have their good reasons for doing so. So to sum that all up, right, like it is incredibly difficult to find archaeological remains of those kinds of burials. Now, what we do have are buried ships that you can go to. You used to be able to go to Oslo and see, but they're currently rebuilding the museum. You can see some in Denmark. You can see some in Sweden, where they buried people with grave goods and sacrifices and all that kind of stuff in a ship that they then put under a mound, right? They threw a mound over it. We also know that they burnt some ships like that, loaded them up with all the sacrifices and goods and then burnt them on ground and then put a mound over them as well. And then, of course, we have the story about Ibn Fadlan, or by Ibn Fadlan, about a Rus Viking chieftain who is buried in a boat burial of that kind, right? Which is then set on fire. And the description that he gives of that process, the things that go in there, all the stuff that happens there actually seem to fit incredibly well with what we have archaeologically. So it's a reason to assume that he's actually telling you the truth about what he sees when he is investigating these Vikings. The whole, and this is why it's so awesome in that show, The Norseman, where the coward chieftain has to set the boat on fire in a burial. What is it, of his father or his brother? I can't even remember. And he keeps like shooting arrows at it and he keeps missing. Right? Yeah, because that's another thing that you could consider here.
Yeah, why did they just set it on fire before they push it out? I did wonder that. Why?
It looks cooler. It looks cooler with the burning arrow, right?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
So for the most part, I'm guessing not everybody got that funeral. It was most people, were they just cremated or buried?
Or not at all. We can assume that there's a decent amount of people who didn't get much of a funeral at all. And it really depends probably on your status. At least that's the current assumption. What we can see in northern Denmark, there's a burial ground called Lindholm Høje, which is just north of Aalborg. And this is the largest Viking Age burial ground that we have. And there are like 900 and something graves there. And they have all kinds of shapes and forms and, content. Some people have been interred as full humans. Some have been burnt, and you get those stone ship settings, you get triangles, you get the circular settings, and so on. So there's a lot of there's a lot of variation essentially happening there, and that's what we see across the board. If you look at across Scandinavia, there's so much variation in how people are handled as dead people. So what we do see is presumably a tendency to give people who belong to the elite that boat burial, and what we then start seeing is also that what we could call the Viking Age middle class or whatever, they start emulating a little bit, and that's probably what that site Lindholm Høje is an example of. Like, it's basically every Joe Sweatsock Viking who's like, hey, I want to be buried like that too, man. And it's like, well, you can't afford that elaborate style burial. It's like Oseberg or something like that, but we can put some stones up that look like a nice little boat for you. And he's like, oh, okay, cool, man, that'll do it. So there's that's a possibility. And then there's also something about status and like what kind of role did you have in life? Like it looks like many female religious authorities were actually interred in chamber graves, and some of them looked like little houses, and they were like seated in there. You could go in there and hang out with them after they were dead. That kind of stuff. We get a couple of those in the Danish area in particular, and I think also in eastern Sweden. So a lot of variation, essentially.